Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 31.
Episode 31 is very special, Ben, and I'll tell you why.
What?
We're always talking about how some listeners are going to like the episodes that are divisible by 2. Some listeners are going to like the episodes that are divisible by 5. This episode is very special because both sets of listeners should very much enjoy it.
31 is not a multiple of 5 or 2.
Nor is it a multiple of 2, but 31 is the sum of 5 consecutive powers of 2. So 2 to the 0, 2 to the first, 2 to the second, 2 to the third, 2 to the fourth. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. 31.
Okay, so if we'd written 31 in binary, it would be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, whatever, 5.
5, right. But here's the thing. It's also the sum of 3 consecutive powers of 5. 5 to the 0, 5 to the 1, 5 to the 2. 1 plus 5 plus 25.
All right. Good job.
So there you go, everybody. If you like 2s, if you like 5s, episode 31 is for you.
Okay, let's do a little bad at parenting.
Yes, and so I wanted to visit something that I've noticed my wife and I doing, and I don't know how it evolved, but I know where it came from. And it came from you. And I remember it had to be 10, 15. When did we meet? Back in like 1843?
2005.
So decades and just centuries ago, it feels like. You told me about a thing when I was just a young man, a bachelor, living the bachelor life.
I was wondering why you used this term in the notes. I thought that's my term.
That is your term. It's the wand of acknowledgement. And you explained to me, because I saw you do it one time. A kid ran up to you when I was at your house for some reason, and they said some inane thing that kids say. And you did this little hand motion and said, yes, that's very nice. And then the kid ran off. And I was like, what was that? Oh, that is the wand of acknowledgement. And the idea being that small children don't necessarily want actual input back from you. They just want to be seen and heard, and they want you to acknowledge that they've been seen and heard.
So
yes. Go ahead. Yeah, so, do you have anything to add about that?
Well, the term that my wife and I use for this is I waved the wand, which is a shortcut for talking about the wand of acknowledgement. Like if we're up in the front seat of the car together having a conversation and the kid in the back is going, Mom, 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 Mom. I look at her and I say, will you please stop for a second and wave the wand? And she goes, okay. And then she turns around, does the thing that you just described. The kid stops and we can continue our conversation. All you have to do is wave the wand of acknowledgement.
So that idea just, at the time, I blew it off. And I think I gave you crap for it. It's like, you should actually spend the time with your kids.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I know it's hilarious now that I'm a parent with kids. Like, that's good God. I would have time for nothing else in my life. I only have 2. But what's interesting is that it has evolved and taken on a new life in my household. And I wanted to give credit where credit was due. Though my wife and I, we don't have the wand of acknowledgement. We have a different wand.
Okay, what's that?
In our house, it's an actual wand because we do the hand gesture. Like, I know, listeners, you can't see me doing it, but I'm doing a very Harry Potter Leviosa with my hand as I'm saying this because I can't help but do it in real life. So, like, my son will come up to me for whatever reason, middle of the day. Dad, can I have a Sprite? And I'd raise my hand and do the wand. No. And in our house, it's called the wand of denial.
Oh, wow.
And so the hand comes up and we do the gesture and we think and we take an elevated form of diction. No. Denied.
So I assume if you don't wave the wand of denial that maybe a debate ensues?
I don't know. Like, I just found it as a fun way for me. I get to say no, and I like saying no sometimes. Uh-huh. And so it just makes it adds a little ceremony to shutting my kids down.
I definitely like, you know as a parent when your children are going to engage in a debate. You know what circumstances under which they believe something is still negotiable. And I definitely like to just have a way to signal to them that something is not negotiable and I don't wish to continue any form of debate.
So that exists in our household. And my kids know that they cannot debate with me and that I'm also far more likely to say no to random requests with zero thought given to it than my wife is. And I have empirical evidence to this to back this up. My wife and I both are now home all the time because I work from home now, and she's working on her doctorate. And so we're always sitting next to each other. we're right next to each other at these desks, and my kids do the homeschooling or the remote learning in the other room. And they will come out of the room and they will go to my wife every single time. Even when I acknowledge, hey kids, I'm done with work. Mommy is still working. Come to me with questions. And they will go to her first.
My wife would hate that so much.
I don't know how many times she said it this week. She looks at the kids and like makes it a point, like, why didn't you ask your father? He is sitting right there and he can do this for you.
Okay.
And then I look at him, it's usually my daughter. I look at my daughter and she looks at me and she gets a look on her face like, well, I didn't ask him because he was going to say no.
That sounds like my wife talking. However, you have made it very clear in the past that you have a clearly established hierarchy in your home where mom is the king. And
yes,
we do not have that in our house. So maybe the fact that they go to her first is just the manifestation of their understanding of that hierarchy.
They just realize that I can't really get anything done. And if they want real decisions made, they've got to go to Nicole first.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. If she really wants them to go to you first, she has to like conduct a ceremony to delegate authority to you. Like you should have a knighting where she come in the room and she has a big broadsword and she taps your shoulders and declares you the like school assistant or something.
Now, I think my kids know that it's a function of they really want this thing, or maybe they just realize that there's less chance that they're going to get denied out of hand if they go to my wife first. Because they know that I'm more likely to just tell them no and go away and stop bothering me than to do the thing that you're supposed to do as a parent, and that is listen and talk to and communicate and understand the feelings of your kids. Like, no, get out of here. And here's my counter argument to the whole situation is, if the kids are going to my wife first and skipping me, it's because they know what they're asking for is something that they don't need, right? That's what I'm thinking.
Interesting.
Like, they know that it doesn't meet the threshold for, well, daddy's going to tell me no just out of hand, but it's in that gray area where mommy might let me get away with this.
Yeah, there's one circumstance where I think that's always true. Like there reaches a certain time of day where I'm done dealing with children, and I will not entertain kisses goodnight. I will not entertain stories. I will not entertain concerns about what needs to happen the next day. You have passed the bewitching hour, and anything you have to say to me is no longer valid. So then they know to talk to mom because I'm just done.
That's very Mr. Banks from Mary Poppins. Just like, present the children to me. Yes, acknowledged. Now be gone. I will see you again tomorrow evening.
Yeah, kind of, except I don't hire nannies. All right.
Proper British households.
So I think we've established how thoroughly bad at parenting we are in that situation. I had a huge life milestone this week in bad at parenting.
Well, obviously, we probably should have started with yours, but go ahead.
So my teenage daughter and I, at about 9 p.m, ran to the grocery store for some groceries. And after we got back to the house, she goes, I forgot my AirPods over at my friend's house. Can I go get them? And I said, sure. And she went out and jumped in our third car. It's a 1999 Dodge Grand Caravan with the paint peeling. It's deliberately the teenager car. I bought it off my in-laws for $1,400. It's a POS, but it runs. And if they were to like get in an accident, and I wouldn't be too worried about them because it's 2 tons of mass and it's got airbags and all that stuff. So I'm sitting in that. I'm like, fine. I put the groceries away. I go sit down at the computer. I open up Magic Online. I'm about to sign in for a draft, and my phone rings, and it's her. She never calls me. Never. I'm like, and I pick it up, and I'm like, hello? And she said, Dad, it's Kaya. I got in a crash. And I said,
where does her friend live?
A half mile away.
How does she get in a crash going half a mile?
That's a great question. I said, are you okay? She says, I'm fine. The police are here.
Oh, jeez.
I said, I asked her like 1 or 2 questions just to kind of discern if she was like wrapping things up and they were going to go away or if this was going to go on for a while. I was doing a calculation in my head. Do I let her take on this life experience by herself? I know some parents are probably listening to me and going insane right now. Like, what? Why wouldn't you immediately go? But
Well, I'm with you. This is a good opportunity. Like, you've done the triage. She's physically all right. This is a real world situation that she might learn something from.
Right. And if I show up and handle everything for her, she's just going to take a back seat and learn that daddy comes and takes care of everything.
Sweetie, go ahead and put the police officer on the phone. Yes, Officer Brown. Yes, take her to jail. Like, just
well,
read her the riot act.
I still don't know the circumstances of it. I was trying to keep it short, but I'm the moment you and I are having is longer than this actually took. But all this went through my head. Do I go or do I not go? So then she said something, I don't remember, about how badly the car was damaged, and my brain went, oh, this is worse than I thought.
Okay.
So I think she said the airbags deployed.
Ooh, yes, that's bad.
Yeah, so I went, okay, I'm on my way. And I hung up.
So what did she get? What, did she get sideswiped, or what happened?
So I hung up the phone. I poked my head in the room where my wife was sewing. I says, Kaya got in a wreck. She's okay. I'm going to go help out. And Alicia and I have had this throughout our lives. Every time, we have to take a kid to the emergency room or go, do something emergency like this, one person's going to stay at home and hold down the fort, and the other one's going to go handle the emergency. And she's more than happy to let me go handle the emergencies. So
Okay.
She's worried, and now she's on alert, like she's going to be waiting for me to text her or call her and give her an update in a few minutes. But she's happy to delegate this to me. So I jump in the car and I drive the half mile. And I pull up and I see the cop car didn't even have the lights on. And I pull up behind my car with the headlights on, and I get out and start walking towards the scene of the accident. And the officer kind of looks at me like, who are you, coming up? And I says, officer, I'm the father of the girl that got in the wreck. And she says, okay. She immediately went back to her paperwork. So I come up, it's dark out, it's like I said, 9 p.m. And I look over at the car, and the contents of the radiator have emptied out of the car and gone down the gutter down the hill to where I'd parked. And I look at the accident, and she had hit a parked car on the side of the road in a residential street, square on. Like, so square on that it was just direct license plate to license plate contact.
So how did the cars both get moved from the middle of the street where you were driving at a reasonable speed?
Right. So I'm looking at this and I'm immediately thinking she was texting and driving. Like, there's no way that's not what happened here. But that's not the kind of thing you ask somebody in front of a police officer who may or may not currently be writing a ticket. I'll let her draw her own conclusions about that. So
yeah, it's on your insurance, so probably keep your mouth shut until police officer goes away.
Well, it's no insurance adjuster is going to make this a not at fault accident. Yeah, that parked car jumped out and bit you. So the family of the high school age boy, her age, that goes to her school, who she didn't know, but had come out, and they were out there just kind of milling around. They'd given her a cup of water, and they were standing around surveying the scene, and the officer was dutifully doing paperwork. I glance over and I see that our car is really terrible. I look inside, see the airbags deployed. She destroyed their car and our car. And then I look back at her and notice she's bleeding.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, crap. Kai, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, did you know you're bleeding? She's like, no. And I turn on the light on my phone and I shine it on her face and kind of check her out. And she's not. I do a quick shock assessment. She's not frantic. She's not shaking. She's not hyperventilating or anything like that. Whatever excitement she went through is over, and she's kind of calm and just handling it way better than I would have.
She went through the 5 stages of loss, knowing that you're about to end her life, and she's just in acceptance.
Okay, let's take a tangent on that. The other night at dinner, I decided, I don't remember what the circumstance was, to survey all of my children at the table and ask them, have they ever used the phrase, my blank is going to kill me?
Okay. Now that's oddly useful for this situation.
Yes. So to a child, none of my children have ever said that about me.
So you put that qualifier on pretty hard. So I'm assuming they've said this about other parents.
1 or 2 of them said they'd said it about their mother.
I could see that. Mm-hmm.
Which maybe is why she called me instead of her mom when she picked up the phone to ask somebody to come help her out. I don't know. So I survey the scene. My daughter's bleeding. She has this contusion right on the corner of her eyebrow. This is an important detail that I'll get to in a minute. right on the corner of her eyebrow that has swollen up just like a giant quarter-sized knot that's swelling enough that it's like partially pushing her eyelid down.
Was it shaped the perfect corner of an iPhone?
Yes. I later looked up the speed at which second generation airbags deploy, and it's approximately 14 miles an hour. So I'm guessing the iPhone was traveling at approximately 14 miles an hour when it made contact with her eyebrow.
Nice. That's perfect.
So imagine she had it right in front of the steering wheel, right in front of the airbag, hit the curve in the road, there were no tire marks on the road whatsoever. She never even hit the brakes. All the stopping that happened was because of the collapsing metal.
Oh man. Okay.
Luckily she was probably only doing like 25.
Well, I kind of figured that when you said like the radiator's draining. Like if you clip a parked car, like it takes a lot to destroy a radiator.
Yeah.
Like so. Yeah. So did the road turn? Like she's just blissfully.
The road turn. She's blissfully veering off when she's texting a friend. She's going to be over. I'm going to be at your house in like 1 minute. So she makes contact with this. The airbags deploy. Her phone blasts her in the face at 14 miles an hour and goes into like the back seat. I think that's what took her so long to call me, is she couldn't find her phone.
Well, thank goodness nobody was out walking around.
So here's the parenting fail, Josh. She's only
parenting fail.
She's only, a year and a half out of driver's ed. I was the one that taught her to drive. She's seen me touch my phone while driving. I've never, texted where I'm holding it in front of me and not looking at the road. But, I'll like change the station on the internet radio or like hit an emoji or something like that. I failed to teach her not to text and drive.
You're taking on too much of this responsibility, I think, because I know what you're saying, because I'm guilty of the same thing. You, of all people, you bought me that nice little phone holder that sits up next to my steering wheel.
Yeah.
Because you noticed that when I was a pool guy, I used my phone every 5 minutes I had to use that thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not the best example either of don't use your phone while you're driving. However, that is supported or justified by how old are we? I've not died and I've not killed anyone.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just a near miss. Like, I know what you're saying, like that you're in a weird spot because like you just want to lay down the wrath on her, but you want to take on some of the responsibility. Like, well, could I have been a better role model?
Yes, exactly. Like, could I have been a better teacher in precept as in example as well as in precept? Like, don't text and drive, honey. Text. Like, what am I actually teaching a child? So whatever. I mean, you and I assume you've had the same as me, where like your phone distracts you for a sec and you give it too much of your attention. You look up and you've like crossed the center line a little bit or something like that. And you kind of swerve back over.
Yeah. I mean, I can't deny that. Like I will say that I have never drifted far enough to be in an accident.
Yes, exactly. But a teenager doesn't know how to make that calculation. Like, to her, she was doing the same thing she's seen me do, I'm guessing. Like, there's no one coming, there's no risk. She didn't realize the road turn and there's a black car parked in the street, and she just nailed that sucker. Bam, just nailed it. So I run and get the first aid kit out of the car and come back and use a little alcohol wipe on her eye and put a Band-Aid on. And I think this is just me using my social intelligence. I think the officer may have been in the process of giving her a citation and realized that she probably should have given her medical care and had given and not done a complete assessment of how well she was.
Right.
And put that away. I don't know. Just a guess. So
wait, she didn't even get a ticket.
She did not get a ticket.
She didn't get a ticket for hitting a car like license plate to license plate.
Like, a parked car, license plate to license plate. What?
Listen, I appreciate not giving the ticket. Can she spend a night in jail just to really drive this home?
Yeah, so I've very much taken the position of I'm here to comfort and facilitate a peaceful resolution of this. The people whose car got destroyed, I think he'd owned it for 2 weeks, which is probably the reason it was unexpected to her. She drives this route all the time. There's never a car on that corner.
There's no excuse for that.
I
No,
know,
there's no
I know.
excuse
There's
for
no
that.
excuse for hitting a black parked car, but it was probably why she had this false sense of security about not giving her full attention to driving.
Okay, now I want to know the physics. I want a map, an overhead satellite image of how much the road curved, because I want to know how much time she spent in a conversation on her phone before hitting that car. Because
Yeah.
if it's like 2 seconds, that's one thing. But my suspicions, like I feel like that has to have been at least 10 seconds.
It was 2 seconds. But if that car hadn't been there, she was taking out the next mailbox. Like she was way too far over.
All right, so you're administering first aid, and I assume at some point you locked eyes with her, and in a very calm and soothing voice said, "We will discuss this at a later date," and like really put the fear of deities in her.
My communication style with my children is less verbose than that. She knew. Like I was just in comfort mode, and she knew we were going to be talking about it later, but this wasn't going to be it. So I dealt with the officer. The officer generated a police report, and then we made discussion about towing and insurance and all that kind of stuff. And then I put her in the car and I drove her to her friend's house. I did that because her friend was expecting her, and then she never showed up, and so I drove over there. She walked in. She went inside and got her AirPods and came back out and says, "I'm really glad we did that because I needed to talk to someone, and I'm glad to just get a hug." And I'm like, "Fine." So then on the way back home, we stopped right next to the accident again, and I'm like, "Okay, you're going to sit through this, and we're going to open a claim with the insurance company." So I called up the insurance company, and it took 30 minutes. And I just had her in the car with me while I answered all the questions and did all the things. And I wanted her to be part of this very grown-up, very mundane sapping of my time in life that comes out of her momentary bad decision.
Yeah.
So I take her home, and she goes to bed, and fast forward 12 hours, and it's the next day, and she's getting ready to go to work. And she's like, "Give me the keys to the car."
Oh, you're hilarious. That's so funny.
I'm like, "Start walking." And her mom goes, "What? We didn't talk about this." And I'm like, "Oh no." Like, she just cut me off at the knees. Like,
oh yeah, that sucks.
Yeah. And I screwed up, we should have, after she went to bed that night, my wife and I should have been like, "Okay, so what are we going to do about this when next time she needs to drive?" Like, we just forgot to talk about it. We just didn't. I got the car towed, and it's gone, and all that's taken care of. All that remains is like the parenting dilemma. My daughter, I think that she learned the lesson. She's not the kind of person where it's real obvious from the outside I'll be able to tell this, but I think she will go to great lengths forevermore to not text and drive.
Did she drive to work that day?
No, I made her walk.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And Alicia was. Oh, you guys were okay after that? And did the punishment stick?
So she walked to work, and then she caught a ride on the way home, and the people that gave her a ride home were the ones that she was going over to their house. So it's like other people's parents. Like, she didn't call us and ask us for a ride, and my wife was worried that they would think we're bad parents. So when they got there for dropping her off, she went in the house, and we went out and talked to them, and she hadn't told them what had happened. They're like,
what? She didn't tell the other parents why she couldn't drive herself?
Right.
Because she had totaled her car on the way over to her house last night?
Because she was texting and driving.
Yeah.
And once we told them that, they went, "Oh.
Oh, we're so sorry we gave her a ride.
No.
If we'd have known, we'd have made her walk."
I mean, whatever. I didn't tell her she had to walk. I told her she needed to find another mode of transportation. That having a car is a privilege now that we're down to 2. All right.
Yeah, how many people of driving age are in your house?
Well, that's a constantly fluctuating number. Currently, there's 3.
Constantly fluctuating. Yeah, it fluctuates once a year. I get it. So 3. You have 3 drivers and 2 cars.
Yeah. Well, no, I made it. Haven't I ever showed you my spreadsheet I made of this? It isn't just every year it changes by 1. Sometimes it goes up by 3, and sometimes it goes down by 2. It's a constantly fluctuating number. I'm serious.
I think you've shown me the spreadsheet of the ages and the different gates, and like these are the ones that diapers, and these are the ones that drive, and
yes,
that's a problem.
Like my fourth child is about to turn 15, and then he'll get a permit and he'll start driving. But my two oldest have left home, but one of them will come back before he leaves permanently. It's constantly fluctuating number.
And now, poor kid number 7 or whichever one it is that's getting his learner's permit is going to have to learn a go-kart because your other daughter wrecked the car.
Yeah. So we're getting ready to move, and it kind of solves a few problems. The insurance company gave me a very generous evaluation for that car. I paid $1,400. They gave me $2,700 for it.
Ooh, that's nice.
Yeah. So now I can stop paying insurance for an extra car, and yeah, things will be fine. But we'll just have to get by with one less car.
But that's the message that never reaches your daughter's ears.
Right.
Like all your daughter ever hears is like the fire and the brimstone. She gets the dirty looks from you over coffee every morning for the next month.
See, I don't know if that's your parenting style. I think you're just being hyperbolic because I don't think it's yours either. I don't see any use in pretending to be angry. Like, it's just a thing, and I'm glad she's okay.
No, my parenting style is much more, in the moment, there's a lot of emotion, and my kids know that, but I always make it a point to talk to them later in a cold, logical way. Like, we were upset because of reasons X, Y, and Z, and because of that, you are going to suffer A, B, and C.
Right.
This is not my fault. This is your fault.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did yell at her when she was like, but I need to get to work. I'm like, you should have thought of that before you texted at 12!
Did you yell at her like that?
Yes.
Good. The fact that you didn't throw anything at her is fine.
Yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to get to work? And it's that question just shows a level of immaturity and frustration.
Absolutely.
Like, are you serious? Can you not put 2 and 2 together? Like, you had every opportunity to drive to work until you destroyed the vehicle that I paid for, that I allow you to use out of the good graces of my benevolence.
Yes.
You ungrateful person.
Yes. And I wanted to do what you just said and go even farther. And remember last week when you wanted to go to the beach with your friend and you told me it was going to be okay because you've proven to me that you can always make good choices?
Oh, man. Oh, would have been so delicious. And like, yeah, you would have paid for it later. But like, just like any treat, it would have been so good in the moment.
Yeah, I didn't say that though. I felt bad after I raised my voice and yelled at her. I mean, she's still getting all the consequences. Well,
and this is the thing though. This is strike 2, right? Just based on the bad at parenting segment of our podcast, this is strike 2 for this child. And so if she gets a strike 3, that's a serious sit down evaluation with like, okay, let's talk about your long-term decision making abilities.
Yeah. So let's go back to something I introduced early on in the Bad at Magic podcast, which is my unified parenting theory.
Okay.
Part of the reason I devised my unified parenting theory, and I'll give a quick overview right now if you're new to the podcast, it is the first phase is obedience. Say yes, daddy, and do it. The second phase is investment. What else can I do to help? The third phase is responsibility, or learn what needs to be done and do it.
On their own initiative.
Yes. And then the fourth phase is, now that you've learned those through your time in my house, being a subordinate to me and depending on me for everything, now you can set your own priorities, and you've already learned responsibility, and you can conduct this on your own with your own set of priorities. Go forth and be successful.
Yeah, theoretically, at that point, you're a functioning adult with no experience. So get out of the house and go learn.
Right. I probably devised this system because of her. Like my other children, I knew what motivated them and I knew how to get them, but her, I've just never known. And she's always kind of resisted the phase 1, 2, and 3 because she wants to go straight to 4. She wants to be setting her own priorities and making her own decisions. She doesn't really care what mine are.
This is interesting. I want to correlate this to the fact that this is your oldest daughter, correct?
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying any, that's, relevant, but I've already noticed ridiculous differences between my son and my daughter as far as parenting styles go. Because my son was, we went through a very short phase of, I don't want to eat this, it's bad. It's like, we don't care, you're going to eat it. And, we fought that fight for maybe 6 months, and now he just eats what we give him. He might not like it, and he'll tell us that I don't like this, and we won't make him eat it again. But my daughter is still still fighting that fight, and it has to be more than a year now. So, like, I don't know if it's not getting through to her or if the parenting style has to be different, but there are inherent differences between raising the boy and the girl.
Yeah, I get that. I don't know, because it's going to be different with my second daughter and my third daughter. They're all very different people.
Well, I mean, you would expect them to be, right?
Yes. Now, one reason I think I was kind of out of sorts when all of this was happening is because I'd also had a completely different experience. So let's transition to Ben versus Bureaucracy. You proposed this in the past as a segment. It doesn't come up a whole lot, but definitely came up this week.
Well, it's fun to talk about Ben versus Bureaucracy because Josh versus Bureaucracy, in those situations, I draw this flaming sword and I make people feel the pain and the wrath. And then Ben versus Bureaucracy is usually, hey guys, like, I don't want to do it this way. Can we do it a better way? It'd be better for everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good description of the more accepting and positive passive way that you usually deal with situations like this.
Yes. And I think that was good characterization of my general approach to this. And every now and then, I want to draw the flaming sword. And this was one of those times.
Okay.
So as I've mentioned on the podcast before, I've been preparing to deploy to MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida for a while. I'm there right now. So this is the first time recording the podcast from Tampa, Florida. Here I am. One of the things that you have to do in the military is you have to meet a bar that they call readiness. Readiness is this general buzzword that means that you have met all of the requirements in order to be deployable.
Well, the idea being that you have to have some state that you can hold people accountable to. That, like, if we ship you the cost and the expense of training you, equipping you, and then shipping you halfway across the planet, are you going to be capable of surviving the amount of time that we expect you to be there?
Yes. And will you have done the things in advance that make you so that you are free from outside commitments and have the necessary preparation that you can be successful there? Sorry, that's another way of saying what you just said. You said it very well. So the only thing is that this readiness monster is very hungry. You can feed it constantly and never feed it enough, because there are general readiness requirements that everyone has to do on an annual basis, your annual fitness test, your annual ancillary training, all those kinds of things. And then when you actually get selected for a deployment, then the readiness monster gets even more hungry and it wants other things that weren't part of the maintenance type things.
Yeah, we don't believe any of the stuff that you've done up to this point actually counts. So here's all the stuff you need to do now to prove it.
Right. And there's some stuff they deliberately postpone. Like, yeah, we've been having you do your annual test that shows you know how to put on a gas mask, but now you're going to come down and you're actually going to put one on.
The one time I deployed to Afghanistan, which had a legitimate gas threat, if we had ever gotten gas, I would have died because my gas mask stayed at the bottom of a duffel bag under my bed in my bunk. Like, I never took it anywhere with me.
Yeah, but the fact that you brought it and you were training how to use it, and if the intelligence came up that it indicated there was an elevated threat, they'd have made you start carrying it around.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So they just tax your life, but the machine also allows for this. Like, my leadership gave me some slack because they recognized that the readiness monster got really hungry. And they're like, whenever you have an appointment, medical appointment, dental appointment, training, anything you need to do, just put it on the calendar and then we'll cover your meetings and your other responsibilities for you so you can do that. And they were very good about this. However, the people that requested for me to come are very separate from the people that have to sign off that I'm ready to go. And there's a mechanism that they use for ensuring that they agree on what constitutes ready that is very imperfect. So the people in Florida that had requested me make up a template that says, here's a definition of what we consider to be ready. And it has all the standard things on it, and it has any extra things they want to add. And there's no personal cost to the people in Florida generating my requirement to putting too much stuff on the list.
Oh, right. The incentive is to have the list as comprehensive as possible.
Right.
Because for them perspective, they're not paying for any of this. This is a blank check. Like, if we're going to get somebody, we're requesting somebody, we're requesting, the fully loaded, tricked out, fully trained everything. We want all the extras.
Exactly. So they have a pool of about 30 people that rotate every 6 months. And amongst those 30 people, they reserve the right to potentially forward deploy us into the Middle East. And along with that comes a lot of extra things, needing extra equipment, requiring extra training, and requiring extra immunizations that aren't necessary in the States.
Now, the fact that you're going to Florida, I feel like you should have weapons, and and armor, and chem gear, and extra vaccinations anyway. Like,
this gas mask is going to come in handy. Yeah, and I need 3 reflective belts. Okay, so...
Only 3? Wow.
Because of all that, because the requirements managers, because there's no tax on them to put more stuff on it, for all 30 of those people, they say, all right, you know what, I don't know which of these 30 people I might need to forward deploy into the Middle East, so just make all of them do everything. And
that's the easy decision to make.
And there's no cost to them for doing that, so why not?
Absolutely.
And then my leadership at my base that has to certify that I'm ready to go doesn't get to talk to those guys and say, hey, are you sure you need this guy to go forward in the Middle East? And they say, not really. We're probably not going to send him. Okay, we'll just wipe off these 10 things off his list. No, I got to do everything.
Well, it's worse than that. Like, they have to not only meet, but they should try to exceed that list because they're responsible for filling that requirement. And if they don't, if they send somebody that doesn't check every one of those boxes, it's going to reflect poorly on them. So So the Florida people have an incentive to put everything that they want and more onto that list. And then the people at your base have the incentive to make sure you check every one of those boxes and then a couple extra just to be sure.
Now, this probably seems ludicrous, but I want to give a little history lesson. Back in the 1970s, there were some hostages in Iran, and America tried to conduct a special operation to fly some planes and some helicopters into Iran and rescue those hostages and get them out. And it was a fiasco. And it ended with people dead, smoking helicopters in the desert, and exploded planes, everyone out, and America absolutely embarrassed on the world stage at their incompetence to conduct a joint operation.
That was, all right, so if nobody knows what we're talking about, like that example is brought up, just beaten into your skull throughout all of your professional development as a military officer because it was such a huge, giant failure. And they always talk about how, it was a lack of training. It was a lack of interoperability. You know what it really was, Ben? You know what it really was? It was a bunch, like everybody at the table hadn't done any real wars in 20 years, and they all wanted a medal. And so everybody had to get their finger into this thing, and there was way too many chefs. That's what really happened.
So I'm kind of a believer in this, Josh. And I don't know if it was the PME. I think it's my own personal research. But basically, out of that, our civilian leadership, not our military leadership, said, hey, the military was doing the best they could in the way that we'd set them up, but they're set up wrong. So there was some legislation that was passed in Congress in 1980s that had far-reaching effects called the Goldwater-Nichols Act. And one of the things that they did in the Goldwater-Nichols Act was completely restructure the way that we conduct wars to make it more joint. Instead, because the way it was in the past is the Army did Army things, the Air Force did Air Force things, the Marine and the Navy did Navy things, and if they disagreed, there wasn't a good way to arbitrate, and there wasn't any single person in charge. And that's what caused most of the things that went wrong in the Iran hostage crisis.
Right.
So the Goldwater-Nichols Act said, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to have the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines organize, train, and equip forces. And then we're going to set up a separate command structure for organizing our wars. And they divided the entire globe into geographic commands, and they put a 4-star general of any service in charge of that geographic theater. And then when we have a war in that theater, he requests forces from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. They present him forces, and he uses them to execute the war.
Yep.
So
I need pieces for my chessboard, people.
Right. And then that one 4-star is in charge of them, no matter what service they're from. He's the one making command and control decisions relating to them. And I happen to believe this is a good thing.
I mean, yeah, it could be, assuming that 4-star is trained and understands the capabilities of the other branches. But yeah, sure, go ahead.
And they try to be. This was an all-encompassing thing. They took young officers and said, all right, what we're having is people that become generals that are now in charge of joint forces that didn't have any exposure to the other services early in their career. So we're going to start requiring that young officers have a joint assignment before they even become a colonel. And so they started doing that. So, as a major, I went and did a 3-year tour at Transcom where I was working with Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. I mean, we're drinking our own Kool-Aid here. I think that this is a good thing. So what we're talking about, what was happening with me with my readiness requirements for this deployment was the combatant commander setting the requirements for what a ready troop looks like, and the service component commander preparing that person and certifying that they're ready to go.
Right.
And this is where the friction came up. So I talked to the...
Hang on a second. Was there friction between those, or was there friction with the guy who was being tasked to actually do all these things?
That.
Namely you.
So I called CENTCOM, who's the 4-star that's requested me, and talked to the person I would be replacing. And he says, look, man, you're going to be working in an office building 5 days a week, 8 to 5. You're going to be doing paperwork all day. There's no way in hell they're sending you to the Middle East. So all that gear that they're issuing you, you're not going to need. All that training you're giving you, it's just not going to be relevant. And I said, that's great, but obviously I still have to do it. And I was dutifully going about it because it's just a displacement of duties. Instead of doing my regular office work, I just pushed that aside and I went to the training and I went to the appointments. But I have not had a good history with getting shots. And when I went to the immunizations clinic about a month and a half before I was supposed to go, they told me that I needed 3 additional immunizations that I wouldn't need if I weren't going overseas. Typhoid immunization, a mumps immunization, and an anthrax immunization.
I'm going back to, you're in Florida. Like, you're going to be thankful for all of those.
So it is immediately the seed was planted in my head that I'm not going to be satisfied with this. I'm not happy about this. I'm willing to do all the extra training. I'm willing to go suck rubber and wear a gas mask for 8 hours. I'm willing to, go pretend to put a tourniquet on my leg and whatever all else nonsense they want me to do. I'm ready to go do combat. But I did not want to get those shots, Josh. So I thought, I'm just going to go to Florida. It's because it's such a real thing. Like, the waste of my time in the training is just a displacement. Instead of this one thing I was doing, now I'm doing this other thing. But the shot is such a real invasion of my physical body. Like, they are introducing toxins into my body that have an effect on me, and it felt like a violation.
Which, I mean, phrasing it that way sounds much more legitimate. Like, you could have raised, like, they always talk about conscientious objectors. They talk about people with strong religious beliefs. Like, you could have taken one of those tacks. However, like the military likes to say, oh, if you're a conscientious objector, please come forward so we can fire you.
Yes.
And that's kind of what would have happened.
And that was very real because you and I both knew a young lady at Langley Air Force Base who used to be a senior airman in the Air Force and was discharged for refusing the anthrax shot.
Yep, that's a thing.
Yeah. So I postponed. Well, I checked all other channels. I wanted to see if I could get the requirements guy to adjust my line remarks to indicate that I'm not required to go to the Middle East. I tried to get a waiver through the organized training and equip side to see if I could make like a religious objection or something that would actually be protected and not have negative impact on me.
So you put a lot of effort into actually trying to get out of going to the hospital for 15 minutes.
Yeah, yes. And I love that you said that because that shows the way that people that don't have to get the shot weigh the opportunity cost of getting it.
Right. It's just a shot. Go get the shot. Why am I even dealing with this?
Right. Why are you objecting? What's your problem? It's easy. Go do it.
This is a well-oiled machine. I move papers from this tray into this tray. You don't fit into either of these trays. You're making my whole day terrible.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. All those things. So it was exactly a week before I was supposed to depart. I was supposed to do my final medical appointment out. I went to the immunizations clinic, and it took me I tried all the ways out I could and just wasn't making any ground. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have to do this. So, and it's not like I'm afraid of needles or something. I just didn't want to. It was unnecessary and ludicrous, and I was just a victim of a faceless bureaucracy that didn't care about me, and I was mad about it. And it was representative of all the other times this had happened to me in my career. So it felt like a moral battle.
This is it. This is the straw right here. My entire military career, there's just been this pile of tiny inconveniences that have been building up, and this is the last one. This. I'm drawing the line.
Yeah. So did I not text you when I was sitting in the parking lot?
I think we had this, like, it's funny because I'm trying to talk like I don't know the outcome of the story. I do know the outcome of the story because you did text me. And in what I feel like is a very rare showing, like a reversal of our roles, is you were in your car ready to go in there with the flaming sword drawn and just kick and scream until you got out of it. And I was the one advising caution, if I recall.
Yeah. Yep. You said, well, and you said about what you'd said to me, man, just go in there and get the shot. This is not the hill you want to die on.
I think this is coming from a guy, listeners, like, this sounds like a horrible inconsistency in my personality. It's not. And I'll tell you why. It's because I have personally died on a lot of hills. And so I know which hills are worth dying on.
Yeah. And I knew what you were going to say to me, and I needed you to say what you were going to say to me. So you gave me the strength I needed. I went to the immunizations clinic, and I gave it one last try. I handed them my checklist. I said, hey, this says I need a flu shot and a typhoid shot and an anthrax shot, but I'm not actually going to the Middle East. I'm just going to go to Florida, so I don't need those. And they said, really? Hang on, let me go talk to my supervisor. And they went in the other room, and they said, my supervisor says if you need those shots, you can just get them in Florida before you go to the Middle East. And he signed my checklist.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You got away with it?
So I was like, wow, this is great. So and I postponed that till the very last minute. So I had my final out appointment with public health. I went down there, I handed them my checklist, and they had my medical status up on their screen. And they looked at my checklist, and they looked at the screen. I think they may have even thought I forged it. And they said, this isn't going to do. You still need these 2 shots. And my heart just dropped, sank.
Yeah. And this is the robot that threw the error, but this box isn't checked. Yeah, but I don't actually need that box checked. Yeah, but this box isn't checked.
Yes. And it was immovable object. And I went back out to my car, and I called my deployment manager. I'm like, can you get me out of this? And they're thinking, she's a nice lady, but she was thinking, dude, you're making, like you said, you don't fit in either box. Just get the shot so that you can fit in the box. So I'm sitting there in my car, and I'm like, do I want to fight this? Like, I could fight this. Like, why? I could cause a problem and stuff like that. And then she called me back, and she's like, I even looked into like religious exemption, and they said no. And then she said the magic words, and someone else had already said this to me today. She's like, so if you're not going to get the immunization at this point, I'm going to have to reclama you, and this is going to be a Cat 1 violation, and we're going to have to notify your leadership that they've got 1 week to provide a backfill.
Ooh, yeah, it's like, now this is the line. Like, you can do this, and that is your choice, but now you're seriously rocking the boat. Like, this is something the general gets briefed on.
That was a veiled threat. It was threatening me with my livelihood. Like...
That's like you're going to get attention from a lot of important people in all the wrong ways.
Yes, exactly. And they would all be saying what you said. Why can't you just walk into the clinic and get a shot? It's easy.
Yeah.
Why are you causing a problem over this? And I hung up the phone with her, and I had this moment where I had to decide if I was going to do this or not. And I was so mad. I was so mad because, like I said to you, this was symbolic of all the small injustices you incur over a career. And it reminded me of The Merchant of Venice, the Shakespeare play. Are you familiar with it?
Familiar, but it's been decades.
Okay. Well, the main plot point in this is that the main character, hang on,
I'm sure it's
Antonio, who's wronged Shylock. And Shylock wants justice, and the law allows him to obtain a pound of flesh from the person that has wronged him. And the whole thing is about Shylock seeking revenge from Antonio for whatever. And this was the Air Force extracting a pound of flesh from me. And the crux of the play, The Merchant of Venice, is then once the magistrate grants Shylock his demanded vengeance, then they tell him, you may take a pound of flesh from this person, but not a whit more. Like, not a drop of blood beyond a pound of flesh. And if they do, it's on you. And, Just the year before, I'd gone in for my annual required blood draw to prove that I didn't have AIDS, and they lost the sample and left me red. And I was the one accountable to literally go in and bleed again to prove that I didn't have AIDS so that I could maintain my annual readiness status. And if you were to spill that much blood on the floor and just look at it, it would look like a murder scene. Like, the government is literally extracting my bodily fluids because they're inefficient and uncaring. That's what's happening here.
Man, you realize I got out of the military for a lot of the reasons you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, the straws piled up to the point where it did break my back. I remember I was in a job where I had to have this explained to me because another fun thing about being in the military is your analysis testing. You are subject to random drug tests throughout the entire time that you're in the military.
I love the euphemism they use for this, so I want to say it. It's the Drug Demand Reduction Program.
Yes, we're reducing the demand by heaping on punishments like you wouldn't freaking believe. Like, we can't... Never mind. That's a whole economic discussion. But there was a point in my career where I was getting called for urinalysis. It was 3 times a month.
What?
3 times a month. I had to go to the Drug Demand Reduction Center and provide them a full cup of my bodily fluids.
Okay, the only way they would be doing that is if your commander were requesting it. So
No, it wasn't, because I asked them, like, hey, I'm in here all the time, what's going on? And they explained to me they have quotas based on the hierarchy and the structures and the units. Like, we have to have so many of company grade officers. We have to have so many staff sergeants. We have to have so many colonels. And the structure that I was in was very unique in that I was part of a group that only had 2 squadrons, and the other squadron was in Florida or something, and I was in Virginia. And I was one of 5 company grade officers, and their quota was so high that all 5 of us had to give urinalysis that often in order to meet the requirements for the group that was stationed at our base. So I was not being requested of me. I was not a drug addict. I have never done any kind of illicit drug in my life. But it didn't matter because the system and the bureaucracy had no way of fixing this minor glitch in the system. Like, it's just a weird case, like you're talking
whatever, man. How hard is it? Just go pee in the cup.
Yeah, it's
but
not
it isn't
hard,
just peeing in a cup. Someone also has to look at your junk while you're doing it. I mean, that's sexual harassment.
I'm not going to lie. I'm not the biggest fan of urinalysis testing. I do struggle with it from time to time. And I started getting, like, one of the things that they do is when they call you is they don't tell you what it's for. You're just supposed to show up. And so
but you know what it's for.
You know it. I got really good at knowing, like, okay, it's this. And so,
all right,
like,
I need to drink. And
how long do I need to be there? It's
yeah.
like, you need to be here in the next hour. It's like, okay, great. And then just start chugging the water there. Like, like, for me personally, yes, I had to be on the brink of, I had to be doing the little dance before I could go back there and provide a sample while somebody was staring at me. But
how many times would you say you did your analysis while you were at the academy?
Probably less than 10 times. And a couple of those were directed by our commanders. Not because they can't say, you go to your analysis. They say, my squadron needs a urinalysis. And so everybody's got to do it.
Right. It's how they avoid looking like they're singling someone out. They just there is someone they're singling out, and then they hit the whole unit.
My favorite one is I got the call at like 5 a.m. on a Saturday, and I had been drinking very heavily the night before. And so I did not get to my phone. It was a voicemail, but I looked and I was like, oh, I got a voicemail. Oh, man, I've really got to go to the bathroom. And I was in the bathroom relieving myself, listening to the voicemail of the tech sergeant telling me I had to come in to give your analysis.
Did you try to stop midstream? Oh, no. Oh, no.
You and I, all right, everybody knows that's not a thing. That is not a thing. Like,
you can't say... I think it was captured best by Jim Carrey on Dumb and Dumber when he was filling those beer bottles. I can't stop when she started going. It stings.
Well, it was not only that, but I was suffering like a class 3 hangover. And so I had to get dressed, and I went in there, and I drank like a gallon of water, and then I curled up on the seat in the corner and like tucked myself in. And of course, every senior in SEAL that walked in had to give the little jokes like, "Oh, rough night, LT." Shut up, old man.
Well, we just kind of decide that this is okay. There are things that happen on a military installation that every unit has to pay a tax on. For instance, post September 11th, when they completely stopped allowing people to come into the base because you have a sticker on your car that indicates you've met their requirements to come onto the base, they look at your sticker and wave you through. Now they're checking the individual ID cards of every member of the car. Those terrorists caused a tax on our lives. And part of that tax is it creates queues at the gates to get in and out of the military installation every day where you need to work.
Many military installations have invested multi-millions of dollars in redesigning their gates and their queues based on that single decision.
Yes. And because of that, you need additional manpower in order to get everyone through in a timely manner. And so where's that manpower going to come from? It's going to be a general tax on all the units that are populated on the base. And it's going to be the military people and not the civilians, because the civilians are unionized and they don't put up with that crap. So once a year or so, you have to go out and stand there for 3 hours in whatever kind of weather it is and check ID cards. And because of the drug demand reduction program, once a year or so, you get called to go down to the clinic, stand there for 4 hours, and watch people to make sure they aren't cheating on the urinalysis.
I dodged that duty. Like, I never got called to actually be the proctor, and I would have been a terrible proctor. Like, nope, no thank you.
Yeah. And so if your imagination isn't great, because Josh and I know what this is, you actually have to be able to function in a way that you could be an expert witness in a court of law if someone was identified as having evidence of drugs in their system.
I have had friends explain it to me. The training that they receive is you have to witness the fluid leaving their body, going into the cup, and then you have to keep the cup in your line of sight for the entire time until it is turned in.
You nailed it. So, and as we do with these kinds of things, as much as we try to be professional in the way that we things, we just call them willy watchers if you're doing this. And they allow it to be someone of the same gender, but it's still someone watching you go to the bathroom. If women aren't aware, female listeners of the Bad Magic podcast, if you're not aware, sometimes men have this psychological thing that has a physiological manifestation that they call stage fright.
I was explaining this earlier. I have a problem providing the fluids that people need when people are staring directly at me, waiting for me to produce said fluids.
Yes, and there is no option of having them not look at you. Like, that's not an option, so you got to get over it. I've never had this particular problem. I think I've had a fail once. Like, it'd been too recent from when I'd gone to the bathroom and I hadn't drank enough, so I just went back out to the lobby for a little while, which you've probably done.
But the social stigma of walking back out there and sitting back down in the waiting room with everybody else in the waiting room, and they know what just happened. Like, he tried and he couldn't do it, so he had to come back out here.
You do the walk of shame.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone that's in the lobby is waiting, but thankfully the ones that are waiting in the lobby probably also had the same problem. So. Okay, but I was leading up to a quick story. I'm going to give every Bad at Magic listener an insider tip. If you ever decide to enter the military, they integrate a drug test into your first week of military basic training. I don't know how and when this happened at the academy, but I know at Lackland for enlisted and at Maxwell for officers in the Air Force, during your first week there will be a urinalysis at some point during your first week.
So we had a person in my basic cadet squadron that, and the day before we had filled out the forms attesting, no, I have never even seen what illicit drugs are. And
Of course, they don't want to just nail you for drugs. They also want to stick a form in your face that you signed and swore on your honor that you hadn't done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the people in my cadet squadron, he failed the urinalysis test, and they kicked him out not because he failed the test,
but because he lied on the form?
Because he falsified a government document.
Yeah.
Like, if he had said on the form, yes, I took recreational drugs or whatever on
they'd
such
have
and
nailed
such
him
date,
for something else.
He would have been he might have been in trouble for something else, but he might have been fine.
Wow. Okay, so what they do, it's hazy, as you used to say. This is a haze. All right. Everyone in the upper class, you remember what you did 6 weeks ago? Now it's your turn. So everyone is on Willy Watch duty, Operation Golden Flow. We're going to go down. All the new guys are sitting in the auditorium. We're making them drink from their canteens. They don't know what's about to hit them, but we're going to go down and make all of them pee in a cup, and you're going to witness it.
Oh, they did not trust us to do that at the academy. We had professional Willy Watchers that were trained, enlisted troops, and You get 40 guys at 3 a.m. waiting to pee, and there's only 2 guys that are watching. Like that's
Oh my gosh! So everyone's out in the hall doing like the cross-leg potty dance. Yeah.
or just wanting to go back to bed. Yeah.
Okay, so I go down to the auditorium and they just line them up at the door, and whichever one comes out, you randomly get the guy. I do not remember this guy's name, but this poor guy had the worst stage fright I've ever seen. It took 2 hours, and he was drinking the entire time. At one point, I'm standing behind him, massaging his shoulders. Come on, man. You can do this. I believe in you. Like, do we need to go know each other better? Like, come on. Like, you could do this. Because he's not going anywhere, and I'm not going anywhere until he pees in the freaking cup, and he is absolutely seized up like a rusty old pump. Could not do it.
We have gone far afield. I don't think we've ever found out if you actually got the anthrax shot to go to Florida.
So I told you all that so I could tell you this. I was sitting in my car, and I was grabbing the steering wheel, and my knuckles were white. And I let out a primal roar like I've not done in 10 years. I just absolutely screamed at the top of my lungs. Just screamed. And then I let go of the steering wheel, and I walked inside, and I calmly went into the immunizations clinic, and I got the same person I'd seen earlier that had told me I didn't need the shots. And I said to them in, like the tone of voice of someone that's died inside, yes, yep. But I need the shots. I was done fighting. I'd already given up. So they gave me the shots, one on my left arm, 2 on my right arm. And then I went down to the other place to see the other person that had also threatened me with my life and well-being and the ability to provide for my family, who I outrank by 10 ranks. And they signed off on my paperwork, and it was all done. And everyone calmed down. There was no more, Cat 1 violation going to happen. And I went home. And what I didn't realize is that I had spent all of my emotional reserve for being nice.
I'm done. That's it. I have spent all of my social energy for the day.
Yeah.
And so then like a kid dropped a plate, or somebody, like, you stubbed your toe, like something happened, and you just let that loose onto somebody that didn't deserve it, didn't you?
It was my wife.
Oh, it's always the spouse.
Yeah. And she also had some things go wrong in her life, and it always happens like that. It never happens when one of you's at full and the other one's at empty, and somebody can be understanding and take up the slack when the other one needs it. It's just she also had a few bad things go wrong that day, and then she was just treat me a little crappy that I normally probably could have let go, but I didn't and wasn't, and then I committed a few of the sins that then trump anything else that had happened, and I slept on the couch that night.
Oh, Ben, we could have a whole episode just discussing the dynamics of an argument between a husband and a wife and how they evolve and change and the tactics. Yeah. No.
Okay, so I want to give one little epilogue. I'm sorry this has gone on so long. So the next 3 days, I absolutely had flu-like symptoms. I had body aches. I had extreme soreness and stiffness and actual knot, like a golf ball sized knot in my right arm where I got the freaking anthrax shot, which I hate. I had a fever. Like if I'd had to go through any check posts where somebody's hitting you with one of those forehead thermometers, I would have failed. They would have thought I had COVID. And it was 3 days of misery. And it just felt like I felt right. Like I knew this was going to happen. The government did this to me, and I just felt victimized. And it was finally all over. And now I'm in Florida, so here I
am. Like I said, Ben, I spent. This is why I got out of the military, is because little injustices like that I can't let go. I at the time I wasn't a mature enough person to understand that not everybody in the world can take the time to understand the circumstances. Sometimes the system is unfair and unjust, but it works 95% of the time, and 95% is the best we can make it, and that's good enough. And sometimes you fall into that 5% niche where, like, well, the system isn't treating me right. Like, it doesn't matter. It's the system.
Right.
And, man, I fought those fights, and I made enemies, and I got punished, and I got ostracized, and all the terrible things happened to me, and I eventually left because I couldn't handle it anymore.
I can't believe you made it through the hazing of the academy and the worst was yet to come.
So I will say that the Academy pushed my threshold for like just accepting BS very, very high.
Yeah.
I will say that. Like it served me very well all the way until I got into drones. And then the BS level at drones was a whole nother level that I had never even heard of how they misuse people.
Yeah. Well, I've jumped that hurdle. I'm, here in a relatively nice hotel room in Florida. I'm going to be here for 6 months. The job's relatively easy. I'm sure I'll be fine. I'll probably even get to go home and visit my family for Thanksgiving and Christmas.
So, that's awesome. Like, consider that the cost well paid then.
I went for a walk on the beach this morning. It was 90 degrees out. It was lovely.
You're such a weird person. Like, you just went for a walk by yourself on the beach?
Yeah.
That's weird.
Why?
I mean, it's just weird, man. Like, be normal.
People can put that in personal ads, but they can't actually do it on real life. I like long walks on the beach.
Yeah, but nobody actually loves long walks on the beach. You're some weird anomaly.
That's like the most common thing that people like, Josh.
But the unspoken part of that is I love long walks on the beach with someone else.
All right. I want to shift gears entirely. So one of my goals while I'm down here is to do a bit of writing. And I have some questions I want to ask you, but one of them is kind of a tangent, so I'm going to ask these out of order. The first is something we talk about on this podcast a lot is spoilers.
Okay.
You say spoiler alert or, oh, that was a spoiler or something like that. And I've realized listening to us talking that there's two different categories of this. And I want to get your philosophy on what you believe constitutes a spoiler and what the rules are surrounding it. Like, okay. For instance, so let's talk about content spoiler. A content spoiler is you don't want to say something that whoever created this story intended to be something that would unfold in your experience of receiving it. And there's a pretty good understanding of what that is. Like when you read a movie review, the movie reviewers generally, I don't know if there's a manual for this, but they generally avoid certain kinds of information, certain plot points and developments and stuff, and maybe their own personal tolerances, they'll say something that I shouldn't have known, but for the most part there's this common societal agreement of what constitutes a spoiler. So talk about that for a minute.
Talk about just what spoilers?
Like, what do you believe constitutes a content spoiler?
All right, so what constitutes a content spoiler? Well, the idea there being that some people will deliberately avoid ingesting any kind of information about a form of media, be it a book or a movie or a TV show or whatever, because they have a desire to go in with no expectations. Like, I can name several movies where I saw the trailer and then I sat in the movie and I could not stop that little part of my brain that's like, well, the movie can't be over, or this person can't die, or this can't happen, because that little tiny 4-second clip that I saw in the trailer hasn't happened yet.
And sometimes it doesn't. Like in Spider-Man Far From Home, there was this scene where he was in like a cafe and there were guys with like Gatling guns or something. That wasn't even in the movie.
Right. So there's part of the brain, part of your brain processes that should be devoted to just ingesting and enjoying this story that is being told to you, is analyzing and waiting and just checking the boxes of this has happened. Yes, this has happened. Okay, but this hasn't happened yet.
Okay. So from just a complete top level, moral level, someone has a desire to experience a story in its purest form. Whatever the creators of the story intended for me to experience, from coming into it not knowing nothing and then going through to the end of the story and having had this experience, in order for that to be pure, I have to not have information about what's going to happen.
Well, not necessarily pure, but the idea being that in order for me to be fully immersed, in order for me to shut off that part of my brain, in order for me to just really focus on the story that is being told to me, like, I have to not have that checklist that I'm checking off. Like, I can't have any access to previous information about the story.
And there seems to be a general agreement amongst people that that is a worthy desire. Like, people tend to agree to try not to, unless you're just being a dick on the internet. You're not deliberately doing that. Maybe you're doing it accidentally, but for the most part, we agree.
Well, I think we're talking about two different things, because in my mind, there's levels to that as well. There's the two things. There's the purist that wants to know nothing, and then there's the normal person, I'll call them, that just doesn't want to know the ending. They just don't want to, like, they're okay understanding what the plot is or who the characters are, or what, even in general, kind of what's going to happen, but okay. They don't want to know the resolution. They don't want to know anything about Act 3.
So which of those two things you just described would you say there's the greatest amount of consensus on?
There's definitely the greatest amount of consensus on the latter one. People don't want to know how the story wraps up in Act 3. This is the classic being the Sixth Sense.
Yes.
Spoilers for Sixth Sense. I see dead people. Yes. That's the big one. Like people might know, like,
so if it's the kind of story where there's some huge plot twist that's supposed to be a surprise to the audience, you don't want to give away any information that would ruin the surprise.
Right. For, let's say, The Rise of Skywalker. Oh, Rey dies.
Oh, come on. The classic one is Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so that's a much better one. Yes. Did you hear? Darth Vader is Luke's father. Like, a lot more people have a problem with that than they would say, like, oh, Han Solo gets captured by Darth Vader. Right.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy, and people just kind of seem to inherently know which ones are the worst. I only recently read that they were so concerned about people finding out, they wanted to keep that a secret so badly that they actually didn't even tell all of the cast and crew and filmed that part separately and added it in at the last minute.
You hear these great stories of directors and writers that take that into consideration, and then they'll release and have multiple versions of the scripts for the characters and for the actors and the stagehands. Like, even the people filming the show don't really know everything that's going on. And I really appreciate the dedication to craft that it takes for all the extra effort to make that happen, just to keep the story pure up until the end.
I have a little bit of a hard time with it because it also reminds me of the way government keeps secrets. But we're not going to go back down that road.
Oh, man, you consume fiction in this meta way that just drives me nuts. But, all right, go ahead.
Okay, so there's another kind of spoiler that I think is interesting. I have some friends that are so sensitive to spoilery content. I think they want to do what you described and be able to completely shut off the part of their brain that thinks they know what's going to happen and just experience it in the stream that it was intended to be. And that is a reaction spoiler. You and I were talking about in episode 27, we were talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then you mentioned that when you got to the end of it with your son, he was like, "Oh, I'm so sad that's the end of it." And then you looked it up and found out there was Nickelodeon had also produced The Legend of Korra. And then I said to you, "Oh, my children went and watched The Legend of Korra, and they said it wasn't as good." And you said, "Spoiler." And I thought, hang on, I didn't say anything about the content, the plot points, the characters, anything like that, and you called it a spoiler. So why do you call that a spoiler?
So you are the type of person that I accept, understand your perspective, but I appreciate your opinion. And so you telling me before I've consumed any of that content that, oh yeah, it's not as good, like I in my mind, your word carries enough weight that now I'm going to sit down and expect like the excitement that I had for this thing is now kind of dulled or chipped at because I'm expecting it not to be as good. And as I was watching the first handful of episodes, I couldn't shut off the voice that well, Ben said, like I was constantly having this little analysis process in the back. It's like, is this as good as the original? Like Ben said, I wasn't, instead of being able to form my own opinion in isolation, I had that one seed that then the rest of my opinion crystallized around. Like I was trying to actively push that out of the formula.
That's a great metaphor.
You like that?
Done. Yeah.
I like it too. But that's the idea, is that I wasn't able to just sit and form my own opinion in a vacuum. Is I already had some outside input into what the outcome was going to be, which then spoiled the scientific process.
Okay, so I assume you've watched it now. What's your reaction to The Legend of Korra?
It wasn't as good.
Do you feel like you would have thought it was better if you didn't have that seed from me?
I don't know. And this is the thing, like that's something that we can't ever experiment or find
out
about.
You can't go back and be a virgin again.
Yeah. But I mean, who wants to be a virgin again? Even bad experiences.
That's a thing, Josh.
That's a whole other thing.
That's a thing.
But when it comes to Legend of Korra, like it comes down to like a handful of nitpicks. Like there are a lot of things that I really, really like about it, and there's a lot of things that I didn't think were as strong as they were in the first story. Like, I don't think the individual character arcs in Korra are as strong as they were in Avatar, and that's what I really appreciated in Avatar.
Yeah.
But the setting in Korra was so much richer, and I liked that way, way more than I liked in Avatar. But this episode isn't about that.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about two different kinds of spoilers. There's a content or a plot spoiler, and then there's like a reaction spoiler. And I have friends that I think recognize that perhaps those are two separate things, but they don't want either. So like I have one friend on social media that I met through Magic that when he's excited about a new movie to come out, he recognizes we're approaching the point where people will either have heard rumors or have actually seen it and he hasn't yet. He'll completely stop. Like he'll stop going on Twitter, he'll stop going on Facebook until he's seen it to preserve his virgin experience, and then he'll re-engage.
I mean, I can respect that. That's a level of dedication to experiencing something that I rarely have. Like I did that with Endgame, with the Avengers Endgame. I tried to consume as little content as possible before I went and saw that movie, and I was very happy for it.
I'm comfortable with what I think is society's generally accepted level of what doesn't constitute a content spoiler. Like I, as kind of a hobby, like to read movie reviews just because it helps me think about the way that people experience something, contextualize it within the canon, understand where it fits in the context of all other things, how it fits in the producer's body of work and what it says about society, all those kinds of things I like to think about.
You're dressing it up, but it's just this freaking weird meta thing that you do with all fiction where, like, when I'm watching a fiction movie, I'm on the edge of my seat with my eyes big and just little kid Josh.
What are his superpowers?
And I see you sitting next to me, like leaning back in your chair, legs crossed, and a smoking jacket and a fez and a glass of Chardonnay. Like, this actor didn't deliver quite the performance he could have.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. So, I have no compunctions about like going on Rotten Tomatoes and reading all the reviews about a movie before I've even seen it. And I know that I get a little bit of like, okay, I know what's going to happen when I go to the movie, but that doesn't spoil the experience for me. It enhances the experience I want to have, which is that meta experience, rather than this pure, unspoiled version of experiencing the story the way it was told by the director.
We need to have a whole episode about this, of the meta way that you consume fiction is flat wrong. And
Alicia thinks so too.
And I want hours to change your mind. Like I'm going to drill into your brain and I'm going to change that decision. But that's not something we're talking about today.
Okay. Well, we've already run a little bit long for how much I intended for this kind of thing. And we got one big thing we still intend to do. So let's transition to Bad at English.
Okay.
So there's a phrase that the British use that we have a few American equivalents for, but we never use, and it's the word stitch up. They might say in a certain circumstance that this is a bit of a stitch up. And a stitch up is a word that we might say a setup or the fix is in or we're hung out to dry. It basically means that some situation was manipulated in order against you. Yeah. So I might say, I was trying to get out of doing the immunizations for my deployment to Florida, but it was a bit of a stitch up.
Or like your wife asked you out to go out to dinner somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, let's go out to dinner together. And then you show up and then there's two other people there. It's like, oh, what a weird coincidence. These two people are here. We should get a table with all of us. It's like, this is a stitch up.
That was a Josh problem.
Yeah.
I would be pleasantly surprised and enjoy it.
So I want to make this clear.
You'd be like, oh, no, I have to have conversation.
I want to make this absolutely clear. That has never happened. Nicole has never set me up that way because she is the same way that I am. Like if we're at a restaurant and we see people that we know, we both like look over and wave like, oh, hi. And then we look back at each other like, God, why can't we ever get away from anyone?
I like how your brain, though, when you were trying to think of a story that you would think of as an undesirable circumstance, came up with that scenario.
Randomly bumping into people that you know out in the world. Yeah, that's the worst. Just the worst.
All right. There's one other question I want to ask you. I can't move on. So I have told you that while I'm on this deployment, I'm going to have a bit of slack that I wouldn't otherwise have. And one of the things I intend to use it on is to try to actually write a memoir about the Italian job, as told in episode 9 of Bad at Magic. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. So as I started outlining and preparing what I want to tell, I want it to be written in such a way that it will be interesting to read. But I started to ask myself, like, what would be the point? Like, why would I write this? What what edifying thing would it represent in my reader's life, even if that's just mild entertainment? But why would someone want to read this? And when they were done reading it, what would they have gained from it? And I had a few ideas, but I didn't have one clear answer that came to me. So before I do this, I want to ask you if anything comes to your mind.
So we've kind of talked about this when we were doing episode 9, The Italian Job. You said, like, I should write this as a book. And my immediate response was, this should be a screenplay. Like, this is a made-for-TV movie because it has all the elements of, I say screenplay, but honestly, it's the way that you tell the story. The story is interesting. And what's great about it is this particular one is you can frame it in 100 different ways and it would work. You could make this a mystery novel where you are the protagonist trying to unravel the complicated life of a dead man. Like, the opening scene can be you in a fedora and a trench coat standing over a dead body smoking a cigarette like, I wonder what this guy's story is, and then flicking the cigarette away as the opening credits score.
Yeah, okay, that's one.
There is the memoir where you're just talking about, like, some of the most interesting things that you ever had happen in your life. And then at the very end, you reveal that all these vignettes actually happened to the same person. So, there is just the standard, like, this is the most interesting thing that's happened in a long time, and I'm going to tell a story start to finish. Like, just the straight biography of it. Like, there's so many ways that you can cage the story. The question is not, should you share it with the world, which you've already done. Thank you. It's how should you best share it? What is the best vehicle to share the story?
Okay, so there's one conclusion I feel kind of driven towards, and that is what I think a theme of it was, that me, as somewhat of a cloistered Latter-day Saint, was thrown into a circumstance through my job and my sworn duty to defend the Constitution of the United States of America into the life of a person who was very different from me.
Okay. That's a different story.
He was a two-time and hard-drinking guy doing illegal things and all of a sudden I was just thrown neck deep into his life.
And you know what? I can get behind that. And then that's a very different story. That is now a story about you being exposed to an aspect of the world that you didn't know about.
Yes.
And so the constant reminder revolution, it has to come back to you, the lessons that you were learning and how you grew as a person throughout this process. I mean,
and
that's...
I don't... yes, and that would, if that was it alone, then it would appeal to people like me. But I also want it to appeal to people like him. And I think the lesson that I would try to weave into this story to take away from it is that both of us, people like him and people like me, are more alike than we thought, and we just didn't know it because we don't have circumstances where our lives overlap. But his death brought our lives together and made me realize that I was more like him than I knew.
So the question becomes, whose story are you telling? Are you telling his story, the story of the life of the person that you had to discover and unfold? Or are you telling your story, the things that you had to learn as you discovered these things?
That second one.
Okay. So then this is a book about you. So then you are the protagonist. And you are telling the story about the guy that died. And you are constantly having to weave in how it impacted you. Like, if I'm a reader reading this book, I care about you. Yes, the story might be very interesting, but as the protagonist, you need to be the focus.
Right. Okay.
That would be my advice. Having written not a single book on this earth. So, like a complete layman's...
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. I mean, there's a million hurdles I need to go before this thing's going to see the light of day. First of all, the easiest to understand of which is actually writing it. But I mean, there's going to be government secrets. There's going to be people who are not shed in a positive light. There's going to be sensitive relationships. I mean, there's 100 things that are going to stand in the way of this ever seeing the light of day.
So, so there's a whole process, like you just identified, in actually getting this published. And the first hurdle is writing it. However, steps that are later in this process might affect how you approach this first step.
I agree. 100%. This is why I've sought out legal counsel, an editor, several things like that to just try to understand, like, like if I write this to one target market and that's not the right target market, I've wasted my time and written the wrong book.
So what are your objectives in writing the book? Do you just want this story to exist out in the world, or do you want it to be a bestseller?
That second one. I'd be happy to see if I have a life as a writer ahead of me after I retire from the military.
So maybe not a bestseller, but you want to see if you can actually achieve some amount of royalties from this story.
Absolutely.
Okay, in that case, like you need to make sure that it is engaging and exciting at every turn.
Right.
Like I would then encourage you to take some of the advice that Brandon Sanderson gives, and also, I don't know if anybody's ever said something like this or where I read this or picked this up, but write like 3 or 4 pages, and then like give it a couple days and then read it back, and like, is this interesting?
Yeah. And I would be a terrible judge of that because my life's interesting to me. As another thing we need to repeat, that the theme of the Bad at Magic podcast, Josh's theorem. What do you call it?
It's everybody is the star of their own life.
That's right. Everyone is the star of their own life. Okay.
So of course it would be interesting to you because you lived it.
So speaking of being the star of your own life, one of the areas in which you can be the star of your own life is in a role-playing game.
Oh, what a forced and apt transition.
It was time.
I've been trying to put it off as long as possible.
Okay, so I've been teasing for a while that I've wanted to do this. You have talked about in the past in your gaming life how you were a player of the massively multiplayer online role-playing game World of Warcraft, which has a stigma probably because it's a single thing that represents a whole family of things, but because it's the biggest, it's the one that gets the most attention.
This is this is a whole genre of games, but this is the one that became so popular it broke the threshold of public notice. Like lay people, non-gamers were aware of World of Warcraft as a thing in the world because it became so popular.
All right, I wrote a little scripted intro, so I'm going to read it. The global video game industry is estimated to have revenues of over $150 billion. Approximately 10% of that market is role-playing games or RPGs. One of the biggest and most popular RPGs is a game by Blizzard Entertainment called World of Warcraft, which falls into the subgenre of RPGs that are online and interactive. Since Blizzard decided to throw their hat in the online role-playing genre in 2001, they have grown to over 100 million subscribed accounts, by far the largest of any MMORPG. That's one for every man, woman, and child in the Philippines. Or if you want to keep this on this continent, that's one account for every man, woman, and child in California, Florida, New York, and Texas.
Wow.
Blizzard's intellectual property has spawned a web TV series, a movie, and countless parodies, and has kind of become a cultural touchstone for multiple reasons. Let's dive in.
Oh boy. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but let's just go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned in the past that you got introduced to World of Warcraft at the Air Force Academy, but that you were already kind of open to that. What was the hook that got you into it and kept you coming back?
Okay, so what was the first time that I dove onto this hard drug and stayed there? So the game was originally released in 2004. I was a junior, I think. I was a junior at the academy at the time. And I needed an escape. Like, life at the academy sucked. It was terrible. Like, it was very stressful. It was highly competitive. We have a much higher class load than the average student does. Like, for example, when I was a sophomore, I had 21 credit hours, both first and second semester. So on top of all the military duties, on top of all the other BS you have to do, on top of the ancillary training that you're required to do at the academy in case for some reason you get deployed to the Middle East, we had to do all of this stuff. And the stress levels were just insanely high. And I needed something that I could take my brain and put my brain into it and ignore my real life, which was bad at the time, and just live this fantasy for, stretches of time. And World of Warcraft fit that very, very well. The biggest reason being that it was interactive. Like, I was a gamer at the time. Like, I had computer games and I played a lot, as much as I could get away with. But this was the first one where all of my friends would also exist in the game, and we could all chat with each other and do things together and still like have our social structure and have these shared experiences inside of this fantasy world.
Okay, so talk about that for a minute, because that was a transformative moment in the history of the internet. The internet to the point it kind of been like individuals dial up and interact on like a message board or something where it's not in real time. And the technology proliferation had reached the point where now enough people had enough high-speed access that we'd reached the point where you could interact with people in real time in a way that was graphically rich and engaging enough that people would want to do this. So the technology had reached the point, and the acceptance in society had reached the point, and now you are kind of pioneers in this. I know World of Warcraft wasn't the first MMORPG, but it was among the first.
It was, like I said, it was the first that broke the threshold. Like EverQuest existed long before that. Like if you want to get really into it, Dwarf Fortress was like a text-based one way back in the day. Like there were others. This one was, insanely popular because it came from Blizzard, which is now Blizzard Activision, which is known for putting out very detailed, very in-depth story-wise games, and also very polished games. Like they have consistently delayed games that they didn't think were up to snuff, as opposed to releasing an incomplete product on time.
I can tell that appeals to you.
Yes, I must. I don't. How many times have we talked about stories and storytelling in this podcast? Like I'm very much into the lore, and the World of Warcraft. Like the reason it's the World of Warcraft is that point there was 3 real-time strategy games that were Warcraft. There was Orcs versus Humans, the first one way back in the day, Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3. And in those games, like they told a very good story as well. Like this is a fantasy world. Here are the main characters. Here is the story arc and the plot that is happening that you play through as you play these games.
So I played Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2, and maybe there was a story in it, but I wasn't aware of it. But it was just a single-player game on a PC where you're not interacting with other people. So the conceit here was the conflict that you were fighting in these real-time strategy games on your computer is a whole world with a whole backstory and stuff, and now we're going to make it interactive, and you can come live in this world.
Yes. Now you are dropped in as a foot soldier in this war that you've been fighting on one side against the other, and against the demons or the Alliance or whoever.
It's very appealing.
And you get to run around and see these characters. Like Thrall, the war chief of the Horde, is right there, and he's talking to me. He's giving me quests to go kill boars. It's amazing. Yeah, there was just like from a fiction and a storytelling standpoint, like it just hit all the switches, and it was just so good.
Okay, so you had a hole in your life that needed to be filled. This came along at the right time, and you took it on. I assume the stereotype is that then it just takes over your life and does too much. Did you ever have that kind of experience where you were spending too much time on it, or failing classes, or missing things?
I never failed a class. I want this on the record. I've never failed a class. However, I can show you my transcript, and I could point to the semester that World of Warcraft was released, and you can see
it's a visible blip.
You can see the plummet in my GPA after that.
Okay.
Now, I remember multiple times.
You can detect when you started World of Warcraft by looking at your transcript.
I remember a biology class that I was remote. I sat in the back of the class, and I had my laptop, and I was remote desktoping to my computer in my room and playing World of Warcraft through the remote desktop. And then I could alt-tab into my notes that I was taking diligently anytime the professor got anywhere close to me.
Wow. So you've done some of those things that have become part of the stereotype, like you were playing in class.
Oh, Ben, I've done all of that. We had a guild member who was from South Africa, and I will never forget this experience of logging on Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. like, yes, it's Friday, I'm doing this. And he was on the voice chat, this guy in South Africa, like, oh, guys, like, oh, it's good to see you, but I got to log off. I've been playing all day. It's like, all right, yeah, we'll see you some other time. And then he logs off. And me and my friends start playing and doing our thing. And then he logged back on. And he goes, you guys are still online? And we looked, and it was 6 or 7 o'clock the next morning. I had just right through the night.
Okay, how many all-nighters would you say you've pulled?
More than a couple of dozen. Like I spent so much time then.
All right, so let's talk about this for a minute, because this was... When I was a kid, it was Dungeons and Dragons. My mom, it had this bad press, and they thought it was crazy people, and you go off in a cave somewhere and kill yourself or something, whatever, satanic rituals, those kinds of things. Every generation finds this thing, I guess. For ours, it was massive multiplayer online role-playing games, and the stereotype was that you would get so absorbed into this world that you would neglect the real world and your life and everything around it.
So, yes, because my grades did suffer. There was assignments that I blew off, and there was things that I wasn't paying attention to because I just wanted to escape the reality that was the terribleness of the academy. That said,
why do you think that works? Why is it able to do that to people where they forget sleep and eating and bathing?
So the bathing, that's pervasive through nerd culture. I don't know why. Nerds, right now, public service announcement. Hygiene, number one priority. It does not take that much time to shower. Deodorant, antiperspirant, shampoo, soap, just do it. Okay, PSA over. For me, it was literally just the escape. It was like, and I can see a lot of other people doing that exact same thing. Like, the world is kind of a bad place. Like, right? Like, look around. We're living in the darkest timeline of 2020. I can guarantee the subscriptions to games like this have surged and just gone up exponentially because instead of dealing with the problems, instead of doing the hard things or taking the steps that you know that you should be taking as a responsible person, it's so much easier to say, oh, well, I'll take care of that in a little bit and log on to this game that has never-ending unlimited content. Like, you can trick yourself into thinking, like, I'll take care of this. I'm just going to play for a few minutes. But then, like, the content is always there. There's never a definitive finish, and you just keep iterating and going and looping until all the time is gone. It's like, oh, well, too bad.
Yeah, and then it's the next morning, and you got to get up and go to class, and you haven't slept yet. And you haven't eaten, and yeah, I mean, this has become a cultural touchstone. I mean, look at, South Park famously did an episode of it. I'll put a link in the show notes, where there's just this guy sitting at a computer and he's like,
I remember I had to log off of WoW to watch that episode of South Park, and then I immediately logged back onto WoW.
Just no sense of irony whatsoever.
Oh, no, there was definitely the sense of irony, but just like, yeah, that's kind of how it is. Like, they got all the inside jokes right, so I could appreciate it, and then I just went back to playing.
Yeah. And there have been occasionally news story of some guy in South Korea who played for 3 days straight and then died at the keyboard.
All right, let's make this perfectly clear. Like, I have absolutely nothing against our South Korean friends and brothers, but those people are freaking crazy when it comes to video games.
Yeah, you've interacted with them in the game. They approach everything in their life this way, making TVs, sending their children to school. It's just like that.
Everything's dialed to 11, yeah. And so you can imagine, like, if somebody's looking for an escape in that culture and everything's at 11, they're going to log in and they're going to do it to 11, Ben.
Yeah. So underneath it all, whether you're talking about EverQuest or Second Life or World of Warcraft, there's this idea that's going to be more and more real as the technology improves of being able to escape into another world and be a new person. Did that part of it appeal to you?
So I said this after WoW had been out for a few months that, like, and there has been animes forever and manga and like Japanese content because they're always ahead of the curve when it comes to video games. There's one in particular called Dot Hack where the protagonist is plugged. He's basically a paraplegic that's just plugged in and lives his entire life in one of these massive.
He's way better there anyway.
Right, yeah, exactly. And like he just lives his whole life there. There's a great one, Sword Art Online, where people get trapped in it and just live in the MMO for multiple years.
Oh,
like, it goes. The list goes on.
There was the Bruce Willis movie,
Surrogates.
Surrogates. There's Ready Player One. Yeah.
So I said a few months after this had come out, and I said this for many years, that like as soon as they get the virtual reality, the full in-depth like Ready Player One style into this, like plug me in, hook me up to an IV drip because I'm just going to live there until I die. Now, that said, I have matured and grown up and understood. And like as I mature and learn more things, like I am legitimately... This is one of the doomsday scenarios that will destroy the planet. People talk about World War III. People talk about pandemics that wipe us out. I think.
What if we're just lulled into carnal security?
What if the video games get so good that they're like Ready Player One and people just stop going out into the real world because the real world is terrible and they just stay in their MMOs forever? Like, I can see that legitimately happening.
There's this sense of cynicism about it because the technology hasn't really reached that point yet where you can see that the people who want to do it already are just kidding themselves and they can't really escape it. I mean, that's underlying every depiction of this I've ever seen. South Park, Big Bang Theory, Surrogates, Ready Player One, not really. But, every other depiction of this I've seen is this kind of very cynical underlying, you think you can escape into this other world and get away from the real world, but you can't.
Well, you see, you say that, Ben, but technology has only ever gotten better. I remember when I was in high school, we were in Las Vegas with my family, and they had a virtual reality arcade, the most state-of-the-art arcade in the world at the time. And this is early 2000s, late 90s. And we paid, I think it was $5 per person for 5 minutes to play this virtual reality game. And all it was a headset that looked into like old school, like DOS-based Wolfenstein.
Right.
It was actual 3D. And when you turned the headset around, it was suspended above you. You could turn it like your character would turn in the game. And I thought that was the end-all, be-all. This is amazing. But we've gone from that, where it was $1 a minute to play, like pretty much a garbage game, to people have full motion sensing, full-body virtual reality rigs in their living rooms today. Granted, they are still expensive, but this technology is only going to be more accessible. It's only going to get better. Like, what you're talking about. What I'm talking about is the apocalypse where people play these games until they die, or just humanity just ends.
All right, let's talk about the Guild for a minute.
I love that show. That web series was great.
Okay, so back in the early 2000s, Felicia Day and some friends became internet famous by creating a scripted web series about a group of friends that played a game like World of Warcraft. Did they actually call it World of Warcraft?
No.
Or was it EverQuest?
They weren't allowed to call it World of Warcraft.
I see.
But
so they deliberately avoided tying it to any particular intellectual property.
But it was definitely World of Warcraft.
Okay. And then what these people's real lives are like outside of the fact that they're spending all their free time in this game.
Right, and that's kind of what the joke was, is that these weird, disparate people were brought together because of this game and the kind of shenanigans and hijinks they got into it because of that.
I want to say there's something different about the Guild, and if you've never seen it, you're going to have some very fun internet viewing going and watching this, because I think there was like 6 or 7 seasons of it, and it was it's a good web series. But it was done by insiders, so it was kind of a loving send-up. There was satire, there was humor, there was a bit of self-mocking, but it was all done by people that genuinely loved the game and respect it. Unlike South Park or Big Bang Theory, people who probably never played it before who just mock it as an outsider very harshly and cynically.
Right. So I know what you're saying. Like, all the jokes are appropriate, and they do a lot of, like the characters in the Guild, there's a handful of situations where they all act and like do things as if they were in the game, but they're out in the real world. And so like that humor really lands with me.
Yeah, now there was one character in there that was a mother. I think she had like 3 children.
I knew you were going to bring her up.
All right, well then you talk about it.
She had 2 kids, and she was a mother, and like she had this loving husband. And like the constant joke was like people like, all right, I'm ready. Let's do this next 9 hours. I'm dedicated. And they're like, don't you have kids? And like, oh, they're fine. And then like it would jump cut to her kids, like literally in like a dog kennel with like a bowl full of like Cheerios or something. Yeah. And then cut back to her. And that was the constant joke, is that she was
always on,
neglectful,
but she was a terrible parent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. And there's been people get married in the game, and people commit suicide over something that happened in the game, or people ruining their real world life because of the game. And
so this is the thing, is from an outsider's perspective, yes, people are like taking this game way too seriously. But, and this is the thing that I try to express to people that have never done it or have never been invested in something like this the way that I have been. Some of the most memorable moments that I have with my group of friends from the academy never actually happened. Like, I will never forget the first time we killed all the bosses in Molten Core and summoned Ragnaros for the first time. I will never forget the first time Onyxia nearly killed me with her fire breath while I was tanking her. Like, I'll never forget when I got, there was a sword that dropped off of a giant boss in an underwater dungeon. And I tried so long to get that freaking sword, and I will never forget the night that I got it. And yeah, like, these things are in a game and they never happened, but all of human interaction, all of relationships that you have with other people are all built on shared experience. Like, the things that tie us together are...
I agree so completely.
So my argument there becomes like, does it matter if it happened in a game or if it happened in the real world? Like, people bond over these experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's what was so good about the guild is they recognize that. Like what you're describing could have been the same as if you'd gone on a hunting trip with those same guys and you'd been out and something had gone wrong or you'd gotten stuck in the rain or you'd gotten your first buck or whatever. And that would be the exact same set of emotions and bonding in IRL as what happened in the game. And you associate those same levels of sentimentality with the game experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what it is. Like, there's the people that I played this game with were also as invested in it as I was. I remember we went to a classroom in the academic building at the academy, and we had a 45-minute knockdown drag out over how we were going to track the currency that we came up with to reward the people that were in our guild for participation and for contributions. And
wow.
Yeah, we had to manage.
So there's a whole set of things there where you're creating an external social structure to make sure that people are committing enough of their life in order to belong and that you can govern their behavior. And holy crap.
We had to create a completely fake currency, how you accumulated and spent that currency, and then also systems for tracking it.
Wow.
I remember my friend, the other computer science major, he created an add-on for the game that would automatically track our requirements to earn our in-guild currency that was completely fictitious, did not exist in the game. And then I created the website that interfaced with that add-on that would then update the website with the list of who had what currency for our guild.
Okay, so did you ever have an experience where you had to have a hard talk with someone because they weren't sacrificing enough of their life to the game?
So that's how we had one of the top guilds on our server when this game came out. Our guild was SMD, which is the same that we used for the same acronym that we used for the wargaming team at the academy. On paper, it stood for Students of Military Doctrine.
Wow, this group still exists 15 years, almost 20 years later.
We all still use the clan tag. We all still associate with SMD. Like, in reality, it stands for Something Must Die. And that's what we go with. But we weren't the best. We weren't the bleeding edge, but we were in the top. People knew who we were in our server in the game. Like, we had a strong presence.
And in order to have that strong presence, you got to earn it. And there's no other way to earn it than just sheer hours of playing the game.
Yes, and not just grinding or hitting your head against the wall. It is like we have to recruit specific people. They have to be to a certain like these are the requirements that you need to be a part of this. And yes, we had to have hard talks with people. And honestly, the guild kind of fell apart because of interpersonal relationships within the guild leadership. Where
drama.
I wasn't super involved with all of this, but we had one of the officers and they had a girlfriend that they met, and then the girlfriend wanted to be in the guild, but she wasn't up to snuff. And
you guys could make your own web series.
It got really, I mean, we were teenagers in college, and we were way too invested in this, and it was all way overblown, and who cares now, right? Nobody even, I can't remember the specifics, but basically our top tier guild broke up because of a girl.
So when I met you in 2005, you had been playing this continuously since you started in 2004. I assume from what I know about you that your experience with the game since then has been a bit of a dotted line. Talk about that for a minute.
Okay, so I played pretty hardcore and consistently for 4 or 5 years. 2009, 2010 probably. And I was on and off, like the depth that I dove into it. I was constantly playing. I was always playing the game. But at certain points, I was like a guild officer and online every day and managing different currencies and things like that. Over to, like, I just log in for 2 or 3 hours in the evenings when I have spare time to just enjoy and play the game on my own.
Yeah.
And I played very consistently for a very long time. I remember I was on leave with my parents. They lived in Colorado at the time. And they had internet, and I had my computer, and so I played World of Warcraft in the evenings after all the social stuff is done. Everybody's going to bed, everything's winding down. I'd fire it up and start playing. And they started calling me the vampire because I would be playing when they went to bed, and then when they woke up, I would still be playing. And so they were convinced that I wasn't sleeping. I was sleeping. I would play for a couple hours. I would go to sleep. I would sleep 6 hours. I would wake up first, and then I would go back to playing before anybody else woke up.
Have you ever had a moment like an addict where you're like, I need an intervention? Like this is out of control.
No, because it was taken out of my hands. What happened was it was 2010 or 2011. I don't remember the year or the specifics, but I was like, they introduced a new aspect to the game called archaeology, and it was everything they introduced in the game is just content to keep players playing. People that have reached the pinnacle, they've done all the things, they've gotten all the gear. How do we keep people in the game? There has to be new content. And this one was like the thinnest veil over, this is a huge time sink. Yes, there are rewards, but it's going to take you flipping forever to actually execute and do it. And it just came down to your character had to go to a place, click a few buttons, and then go halfway across the planet to click a few buttons. And if you do that, 200 times, then we'll give you like the best gear ever.
Okay, so I'm sure that felt just a bit like a red hand, like just meaningless.
Yes, but the rewards were definitely worth it, and they knew it. But it was it was so thinly veiled, like it was almost a joke. And so that's when I spent. I think
so. They got lazy. They were putting additional content that was just busy work that didn't have a story behind it, and
that's what it felt like. And I felt gypped as a player, and so I spent $20 and I bought a third-party application that somebody had developed that would play my character for me, doing that specific task and nothing else. And so I would launch the game, I would launch this program, I would tell the program where I was, and then I would hit start, and the program would take over putting inputs into my keyboard and would run my character for me, and it did all these things.
Wow.
And I got all the rewards from it, and it was great. And so I would do stuff like I would turn it on when I went to bed at night and let it run for 8 hours. And then I would turn it off the next day and go to work and come home and play for a couple hours and then turn it back on and let it run. And I got all the rewards and it was fun and it was great. And then I got an email. I remember my in-laws were in town. We were watching TV.
Oh, no.
I got the email on my phone. It's like, you have been discovered as having breached the end-user license agreement and your account has been permanently banned.
You got banned.
I got banned.
That was the source of the end of your first... Wow. You got banned for cheating.
Like the junkie that went to jail and had to go clean. That's what happened to me, yeah.
Oh. How long? It was a lifetime banning?
That account is still banned, yes. Which is sad because that account had the characters that... I remember, this wasn't even the total time that I put into the game, but I had one character that my parents asked me, how long have you been playing? This is the time I was in Colorado. Uh-huh. How long have you played this game? Like, how much time have you in it? It's like, oh, that's interesting. Let me find out. And there are keyboard commands for everything. And so you type /played, and it will give you an exact readout of how many hours and seconds that you played on that character. On that character in 2008, I had 186 days played. That's 6 months of 24-hour days. Not like I had that character, I had owned that character for 6 months. I had actively been online playing that character for 186 days.
So that's 4,464 hours.
And I believe it. And that's the character that got banned. And that...
Okay.
I had
all right, talk about that. Talk about the emotional impact of having invested 4,000 hours of your life into something and then having it taken away.
Well, it wasn't just that. Like I have to get this on the record. I had another character on that account. It was the first alternate character that I'd ever made. It was a rogue. And I played that character to death too. And I had just as many hours played on that character. So I had two characters with top tier stuff. Both of them had been in guilds that were at the bleeding edge of the game. And that character, there was a website at the time when 3D printing was this magical technology that was going to be a new thing. There was a website called Figure Prints where you could go sign up, and they had a lottery. You
invested so much of your life into this that you wanted to make it something tangible in the real world.
They would take your character model, they would print it out and paint it and ship it to you for $200. And the demand for that was so high, they had to have a lottery And
I
signed.
remember you talking about this
I was
back when it happened.
When it happened, I was just so ecstatic that I had the opportunity to give these people $200 to print out a plastic thing that wasn't real. I still have it to this day on a shelf in my bedroom.
We definitely need a photo to go along with this episode of Bad Imagine.
We will post the photo of Agris, my rogue.
Okay, so was this like a family member died? Is that the level of emotional impact it's had on you?
It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't that bad. Like I knew at the time I was married. Like I had just a burgeoning little family in my own house. Like I was starting to transition into, like honestly, like
so yes. You're describing like an addict that knew they needed an intervention, and when it comes, you're kind of grateful for it.
Those were the next words that I was going to say. I wasn't necessarily grateful. I was split. I was hard split between like, this thing that I've poured so much of my life into is now gone forever. And the other side was like, that needed to happen. Like that really needed to happen because there's no way I was going to get out of it on my own.
Wow.
And my wife was genuinely happy because at the time she might have played once or twice, but she had never like committed to it for any length of time. There was several episodes in our life where we had strife because of my commitment to this game. Like I still remember we had a real row, it was bad. The night that we were together at the gym, and I realized very late that it was a raid night and I needed to get home. And I went to her while she was doing her workout. I was like, we need to leave right now. And like we left and she found out it was because I had a commitment to play World of Warcraft. She was pretty pissed at me for that.
I could see that. Okay, so what you've described, I remember seeing in the mid-2000s when this thing was reaching its peak of public awareness and those, South Park episode was coming out and stuff like that, pieces on the news where they talked about the science of addiction and how this followed the same hallmarks of any other addiction. Alcoholism, drug addiction, pornography addiction, any of those kinds of things, this follows the same pattern. Generally, when someone reaches a point where they've exhibited the behaviors that's causing them to hurt their relationships or, lose their job or those kinds of things, there's this accepted idea that you can never be trusted to do this ever again. Like Alcoholics Anonymous. The idea of Alcoholics Anonymous is not only should you stop drinking because it was hurting you, but you should not come anywhere near a drink and anyone should help you that you never do ever again for the rest of your life.
Because it's too easy a hill to fall down. Like if you're near it, there's too many justifications or excuses that could just lead you down back into the pit of despair. So
you've spent over 10,000 hours of your life on this. It's caused fights in your marriage. You got banned from it. It caused your grades to suffer. I'm not trying to pile on too much. Sorry if it seems like I'm shaming you with this.
Well, geez, you put it all like that.
But you're playing again.
Yes, I am currently playing.
Tell me why this is not a person that used to be an alcoholic now just acceptably socially drinking.
So this is what I discovered, and I found the key. The key thing that I realized I found this fact and I discovered it. I don't know if it's about the game or if it was about myself, but the thing that I was getting out of it before that I wasn't getting out of it again, because I remember I went a long time after I got banned without ever playing again. And then I went back to it and I was like, you know what? I've got multiple email accounts. Like there's no reason I can't start again. And they let you play for free up to level 20 because, like any good addiction, the first hit's always free.
I'm quoting you on that. That's awesome.
Anyway, so I logged back in and I played and it was fun. And I paid for the subscription and I got my character up to max level and I was doing stuff and I was raiding again. And it just wasn't the same. There was something missing. And like I tried so, like I was analyzing myself. I was like, why am I not getting the same sense? Why am I not deriving the same feelings from this I did before? And I realized that a handful of things. The first one was there was a much less of a need for me to escape. Like I felt like my life was turning around. I was taking active steps to be, to improve all the things that I actively didn't like in my life. And so like I didn't need to get away from it as much. But probably by far the bigger part was that social environment was gone. Like all my friends weren't playing anymore. Like I couldn't log in and have these shared experiences with anybody. It was just another For me, it was just another single player game. Yes, there are other people that exist in this game, but I'm not
Yeah,
going to
what
go.
would it have been like to try to make new friends and start a new guild and be an officer? Yeah.
I mean, I did that at one point, but that was before I got banned. And like, it is possible. You can get into a guild, you can meet people, and you can talk to them, and you can be friends. But I just didn't want to invest that kind of emotion into strangers this time around. Um,
So you don't realize this maybe, but you've described what you've found now, that it's your family. You know, you're sitting there next to your wife, you're playing on one computer, she's playing on another computer, your son's there playing as well, and now that's your new guild. Like you've got this sense of togetherness and belonging as you're doing this as a family activity.
and it is. It's the same thing. It's the shared experiences, and you get to talk about the things that happened. And I will tell you right now, I'm kind of already on the waning side of this. Like we have, I think my wife and I both have 2 max level characters. My son he has one character that's almost max level and like 19 characters that are all like level 12.
Yeah, but you know that there's so much more than just reaching max level.
There's so much stuff that's in there, but Nicole has no interest in doing any of the end game stuff with me, and Carter is not quite there yet, which is fine. But it just me, I'm never like a couple of times like I'll go in and I'll play by myself, but I'm already feeling I'll be sitting there at a time where either the kids are in bed and Nicole's doing something else, and like I have like an hour to myself free time, right? And I'll sit down and I'll play this game, and I'll realize that I'm not deriving the pleasure from it that I do when I'm playing with Nicole, when I'm playing with Carter. And that to me is the first indication that this is not going to last, because like it's just not worth it. There's other things I could be doing.
All right. So what's the future hold? Like, is the technology going to catch up where we can't get away from this? Or are you just going to be content being the guy that did this once and doesn't anymore?
So I'll probably keep coming back to it. Like they just released another expansion, and it's interesting where they're going with the story. And like I said, this company does a great job with the fiction. The cinematics they put out are amazing. I remember gasping audibly at a twist in the latest expansion cinematic that I didn't see coming. Like, it was really impactful to the story. Like, you have to know the story in order for it to land at all. Like, watch the reaction video and people like freaking out, like, "Oh, I don't believe it!" Like, I felt that. But where it goes in the future, for me specifically, who knows? Like, I've got more and more of my time is being taken up, like you're talking about, with the kids and the family, and just things that happen in real life that I am much more satisfied with now than I was when I was at the academy. So I can see myself spending less time trying to escape and more time like taking care of the responsibilities and the duties to maintain this glorious life that I've built for myself finally. That's for me. For the world, like I said, I have a genuine fear that this technology will continue to get better. It will continue to get more accessible. And if we ever do get to the Ready Player One point, like that's going to be a very strong draw, not just for me, but for a lot of people.
Well, maybe we should read the book Ready Player One. Have you read it? We'll have to do a book review of it, because I know there are members of our audience that haven't read it, and I think that would be an interesting discussion.
You love doing these book reviews.
I like tying a discussion to a big chunk of written content like that, because I think it gives us an anchor and a set pile of things to discuss.
I think we should do a review of the Ready Player One movie, because that's easier for our listeners to ingest.
No, I can't recommend that.
All right, we should both read the book and then both watch the movie, and then we can have an episode where we complain about the differences.
Okay. All right, that'll have to be 2 episodes out.
Oh no, that'll have to be several episodes out, because we've already got a book queued up for next episode 32.
Yes, we do. So in episode 32, we're going to review Super Freakonomics. So if you're listening to this and you haven't read it yet, now's your chance. It's not going to be spoilery, but we'll just be talking about the concepts and social issues that are grappled with using data and observations about the world around us in Super Freakonomics.
I will say it was an easy thing to digest. Like, I listened to it on Audible. Audible sponsor us. It was only like 7.5 hours, so I got through it in a couple of days. No big deal.
Yeah. But as we're kind of winding down the discussion here, I want to give you a chance to just tie a bow on the World of Warcraft thing. Like, I've been wanting to do this interview with you to kind of talk about it, to contextualize it, to maybe give people that are on the outside of it an understanding from an insider. What's your whole perspective on the whole massive multiplayer online role-playing game thing?
On the whole thing, it's the most fun and memorable experiences that I've ever had as a gamer were in that game. But not because of the game itself, so much as it was a vessel and a vehicle for me to have those experiences with a group of people. And so the social aspect is what really reinforced it. And the fact that you can interact with other people and you can have a sense of community and belonging and dedication and responsibility inside of a fantasy virtual world that may or may not be better than the world that you're currently living in. If nothing else, it's different. It just gives you a chance to shift gears, and instead of worrying about work and worrying about your real life and the responsibilities you've taken on, you can worry about a completely different set of responsibilities that you've taken on.
And you can be a different gender, you can be stronger, you can fly, you can be powerful.
I don't know if I want to say, like, I will go out on a limb and I say I play exclusively female characters in games like this. But I am entirely and totally upfront with everyone in the game that asks me if I'm a girl or a boy. Like, no, I'm a 37-year-old grown man. And they go, why do you play female characters? Because I like staring at female characters while I'm playing the game the whole time. Duh.
Yeah. When we get in the car, my wife's voice on her GPS is male and mine is female. So yes, I get this.
Yeah. If I'm going to be staring at the backside of a virtual character the entire time, the 10,000 hours I'm playing this game, I want it to be attractive.
Yeah, that's understandable. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing your insights on World of Warcraft and your experience with it. As always, I appreciate that, and hopefully our listeners found it interesting.
If not, well, too bad. You listened to the whole podcast anyway, and you cannot unlisten.
Well, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you are listening to the podcast and you have not yet gone on your favorite podcast player and rated it, please do. We would like for other people to be able to find the podcast, and doing those kinds of things helps other people find us. So write a review, give us a rating, tell what you really think, recommend us to your friends so that other people can find and listen to.
If you love us to a degree that's unhealthy, please visit our Patreon page and become one of our patrons, and we will appreciate you to no end.
Like us on Facebook, join us on Reddit, and we can develop a community of people that do something virtually and actually interact with each other.
Oh, we'll have to create a guild in WoW, and we can all meet up at the auction house.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for episode 31 of the Bad Magic Podcast.